We do not care.
Welcome to the second episode of the We Do Not Care podcast. It's Wild Card Week, baby. 15 Acrisure Stadium. We'll be at the game. Firstly, there's a lot of things to discuss. A lot of things that are going on in the NFL and the league recently. Some big, significant coaching changes throughout the league, including Harbaugh, his exit from Baltimore. No doubt he will land somewhere else. I think that's now the ninth coach that Tomlin has gotten fired over the course of his career. Kind of funny to sort of at the end of the season. Stefanski's out of the division as well. Taylor, retains his spot. You see Morris is gone, McDaniel's gone, a lot of guys moving around. So the league's definitely going to look different next year, without a doubt. I guess we'll wait to see what happens with Lamar, if he ends up staying in Baltimore or if he goes to Miami potentially, or Atlanta. We don't know. But what are your thoughts on Harbaugh?
I listened to Adam Schefter's comments on it, and I think, regardless of how consistent someone's been, sometimes an owner might just look at it as, or a GM, the combination of the two might just look at it as it's time for a change. So I think, regardless of how successful he's been, with how much talent and firepower they have, to not have made the playoffs this year was just the last straw for them. And he's been there for 18 years, and I think he will be highly sought after in this coaching cycle. There's obviously a few names that will be kind of floating around. One that I've seen a lot is the Seahawks offensive coordinator, Kubiak, to be
Yeah,
head coaching candidate. So we'll see how this plays out. But I think, regardless of where he ends up, he's going to be highly sought after. And I guarantee any team that has an opening is going to be looking at him. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But hopefully he ends up outside the AFC.
hopefully he's got some ties to Cleveland, so we'll see. But now looking towards the Texans game, obviously, big positive for Pittsburgh getting their top offensive weapon back in DK Metcalf. Metcalf finally allowed back in the facility. Obviously, reporters were going to ask him questions. What's going on with the case? Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the situation? Obviously, I believe it's an ongoing case, and they're still kind of looking at all the facts, determining things. I think that DK handled, like, obviously himself well. Like, I'm sure he was told by his team, don't say anything. Obviously, it could just only penalize you. But I expect him to have obviously a big game this week. I think he's motivated. I think he's very frustrated. He's got a tough matchup in Stingley and Lassiter, as he'll be moving around. But what are your expectations for his return?
One thing that stands out is we saw it against the Ravens, and I mentioned it in our last episode. Just the lack of too high safety coverage that Aaron face makes it more difficult, makes us way more predictable. So having him back, regardless of what his stat line ends up being, will be big in terms of the coverage structure
Yep.
because they might have to play more too high with having Calvin and DK back in the lineup. And I think defenses will have to account, in this case, the Texans, more for him vertically. So it will pull the safeties deeper. Texans have a great DB room, but it'll pull them deeper and it'll open a bit more space underneath. We've seen Arthur Smith be very reluctant in the past to throw against the middle. But,
Yep.
if we do see them pulling their safeties deeper, he's going to have to adjust and going to have to utilize our deep tight end room against the middle. So, think of Pat and Janu. Hopefully, either of them, hopefully both of them, but either of them having a big game this week. I think he's definitely going to get targets, especially in the red zone. He's been a favorite of Rodgers, and they've definitely had a good connection. There was that one game earlier this year. I don't know if you remember the opponent, but they went deep on that first play of the game. They went for a deep ball, and
It was
connected.
Baltimore.
So okay, I guess was
And
that Baltimore? Oh yeah, okay. So the first matchup against Baltimore. They went deep on the first play of the game and tried to make a statement and were able to convert. So I know that they definitely have a good connection. So I'm hoping he gets somewhere between, 7 and 10 targets this game. I'm thinking he'll
yeah,
get between 5 and 7 catches, maybe. He's definitely going to be the guy that they look to the most. Hopefully, I'd love to say he gets over 100 yards, but I think somewhere between like the 50 and 70 range with the way that they utilize the running backs, especially as they utilize the running backs this last game against Baltimore. Don't know where that was against Cleveland, but hopefully, he'll make an impact. And even if he's just a decoy running out there and they're not throwing the ball to him, he definitely takes some some pressure because of how much of a threat he is. So glad to have him back for sure.
100%. I think also looking sort of at the red zone, like you were mentioning, had a couple touchdowns. Had a touchdown against the Patriots, the Browns, obviously the long one against the Vikings. It's this is going to be a tough matchup for him. But without Darnell in the lineup now, I expect him to be utilized. DK in the red zone, probably see a little bit of Pat Frymuth as well. I'm sure we'll see Connor Hayward tush push here and there. You got to have it. Pittsburgh special. Cam's probably going to be behind him, pushing him, but we'll see. Yeah, I think with that being said, I think we'll move along to exactly how this offense, with DK or other weapons, is going to expose this Texans defense, a really, really solid Texans defense. D'Amico Ryan's the head. You got ballers all around, Lassiter, Stingley, Will Anderson, Hunter. I mean, it's just a really solid group. So sort of just through watching film and also just what I've seen throughout the whole year watching Texans games, I've noticed that they have just really limited wide receiver ones and wide receivers in general. However, there have been some instances where they've been a little bit exposed or taken advantage of, especially in the secondary, especially with the linebackers. So looking through film, I noticed Texans against tight ends, some notable stat lines. Brenton Strange had 6 for 60. It's a divisional matchup for them. Kittle 4 for 43 and a touchdown. Chig on Quanquo 3 for 56. Not staggering, but still gets the ball moving. Obviously Tyler Warren 3 for 22 and a touchdown. McBride, he went off. Granted, the Texans were up quite a bit, but still, 12 for 134 and 2 touchdowns. McBride is probably, I top two tight end in the league right now in terms of production. I'd say him and Brock. When they actually have, when Brock has someone that's throwing to him. We'll see. I guess it kind of looks like Mendoza is going to be going to Oakland, so that should be a really fun, dynamic duo to watch.
Vegas now.
Yeah. So also speaking of Brock, Brock had 5 for 33 and a touchdown against them. So obviously reception numbers are kind of up there, but obviously the yards aren't so high. Um, Gadsden for the Chargers, also 3 for 32 and a touchdown. So, Stingley and Lasser, without a doubt, are top five, if not a top three corner duo. Pat and Jonu, they're just going to have to step up if DK and Calvin are, unable to produce, I guess I'd say. Maybe we'll see a little bit of Hayward in the receiving game, but I, definitely expect to see him on some of the tush pushes. I think also like this just is going to require the backs, to step up against this tough D line, whether it's blocking a pass rusher or just being there in the receiving game. That's going to be vital for the Steelers' victory, no doubt. So if you have any thoughts on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think this is really going to come down to the quarterbacks. I mean, the Texans have been great all year. They're on a big win streak, but if this is going to come down to how well CJ Stroud can manage the pressure and manage the pressure of playing away first week of the playoffs, even with how successful they've been this year. So starting with Aaron, he's definitely been better against man than zone this year.
Yep.
Completing like high 60s in percentage. He's thrown, I think it's 13-3 is his touchdown to interception ratio against man coverage. And he has a great passer rating. You know, even with how old he is, he's been pretty efficient, has been a little less consistent against the zone, but still a pretty good touchdown to interception ratio of 11-4. And I think zone has been more, in terms of his performance about kind of efficiency rather than the explosiveness because they've been limiting some of our big plays. Not that we have that many. But also, I mean, Texans, they're going to have a great blitz package. That they're well coached and they've had a terrific defense this year. But Rodgers is getting the ball out so quick, so that's going to be a big thing to watch this game. How quickly he gets the ball out, how quickly his number one receiver is on each play is kind of routed, and how well we're set up to kind of get the ball out efficiently and make sure that he's not hanging back there in the pocket as well as the O line has played at certain times this year. Gonna need him to get the ball out quickly. He's still been pretty good against the blitz this year, but it's been tough just with him holding the ball on too long. He's not as mobile this year. He's getting up there in age, so we're gonna need him to make sure that he's getting the ball out quickly.
Yeah.
And then also it's just huge having DK back. Getting those two high safety looks where we're more of a threat will hopefully limit the, one-off safety blitz that they send. I think if you're stopping Rodgers in this game, you're kind of just slowing him down. So
Yeah.
we're gonna have to make sure that we're looking over the middle. we're pretty healthy going into this game. We have our tight ends, locked in. Unfortunately, we don't have Darnell, which will be a huge loss in the run game, and then also in the passing game as well, with how difficult he is to guard. But we still have some weapons, and getting DK back is huge, just with how big of a vertical threat he is. And then kind of moving on to Stroud, I think he's been good against man. I wouldn't say great. I think his touchdown to interception ratio against man is 9-4. And then against zone is where he's really shined. So a bit different from Rodgers this year. I think he has a 10-3 touchdown to interception ratio this year. And
Mhm.
his EPA per play against zone is top six in the league. So against the blitz, his kind of obviously, as most quarterbacks, his completion percentage drops, and that's the area where pressure really shows up. So we're going to need to have big games, not just from our edge rushers, but another big game from Cam. Shout out to him for earning the All Pro nod. I noticed that Joey did not get a single All Pro vote
Or
today, which was
Frazier,
something to
or I don't think
or
Frazier
Frazier.
would.
Yeah, Frazier didn't get one, and Troy didn't get one as well, which, I mean, Troy might fly under the radar as an offensive lineman, but I mean, Rodgers has been kept pretty clean this year, especially with some of
Yeah,
the inconsistencies that we've had. He's been pretty good. So, um, I think against too high safety look this year, CJ has been pretty good, and his poise this year has been pretty good, similar to how he played his rookie year. So, if he's able to kind of play that way again in this game with the pressure that we're probably going to be sending, because as always with Terrell Austin, he's been pretty reliant upon our pass rush to be successful, and that has driven most of his schemes, hoping it really doesn't get past the point of our pass rush getting a sack. So if he hangs in there and we're able to get some pressure, I think we'll be successful. But also, moving on to just a quick few stats on our defense, I think Houston's offense is pretty comfortable living in that first down, getting 5 to 7 yards, that type of range. And I think we just want to take away their explosive plays. They obviously have a talented receiving core. I know Tank Dell, unfortunately for them, has not been able to play this year with injury, but they still have talented weapons. They have Schultz and Nico Collins, especially, will be something to watch this game. His matchup against Joey and the way that our safeties step in. So that'll be something that we need to keep an eye on.
definitely. I think more on our defensive game plan, like you said. I mean, you know, wide receiver ones, it's like when Joey's going against Chase or Higgins. Obviously, everyone's moving around. Joey's not going to stay on Jamar the entire game. That's just how it goes. Different coverages, different schemes, everything like that. But when Joey is on Nico, Nico is a big deep threat. You're going to have that safety over the top, whether it's Ramsey or Duggar. It looks like we might see a little bit of Chuck Clark this game as well. And also, like you said, Higgins and Hutchinson, they're not to be overlooked. They are very, very solid wide receivers. Eccles, Asante Pierre, whoever is back there, they're going to have to step up. They're going to have to be locked down for the most part. PQ and Peyton Wilson, it's a tough matchup against Dalton Schultz. I think Schultz is like the top rated, maybe besides McBride, like fantasy tight end in the league, which is obviously very impressive. Sort of a safety blanket for Stroud. And just in general, can't get burned over the top. As a result of poor scheming, kind of like what we saw against Zay Flowers. Like you just can't have that.
No broken plays. Broken plays this week are going to
Yeah.
cost us 100%.
I think another thing is third down. You have, well, for both sides. First of all, third down for offense, we have to be able to stay on the field. We cannot have short drives, put our defense back on there, have them be exhausted. But on the other side of the ball, third down, we have to get off the field. Fairbairn is a great kicker, but that's not going to matter if it's deep shots or Woody Marks is just kind of running all over us. Sort of going to the line, I think, the Texans line, they've been pretty inconsistent for the most part, whether it's been Mills or Stroud in there. Stroud's been sacked 23 times. I think Mills was sacked about 7 times when he was in there. So I think it's in the couple games he was in. I think it's around 31. Also to do with the secondary, Stroud's had, I believe, 8 picks in 14 games this year. The secondary is going to have to capitalize, on errant or tipped balls. And then, lastly, just the defensive line. You have to limit Woody Marks. He's sort of their main back. Nothing like overly special, but he's a talented young player. Obviously, not having Joe Mixon is very big for Pittsburgh, the fact that he's out. But yeah, I think all in all, just have to play really clean on both sides of the ball. Obviously, you need a great performance from from A-Rod. And, I don't think it's out of the cards to get it done. We're going to be at the game. It's going to be a really fun time. It's going to be electric, Renegade in person. Everybody's just kind of got to be on it. A big team effort. But yeah, I'm excited. Hopefully we can get that win.
Yeah, I think we're just, you mentioned Fairbairn, and I think this game with how talented these defenses are, obviously the Texans defense has been a lot more consistent than ours has been.
Yeah,
But field goals will be big in this game. It's going to be
yeah,
in Pittsburgh. Definitely not going to be warm out there, and could be very windy. Like this is going to be a nail biter. I think if we keep this a close game, field goals will be going down the field and ending a drive with 3 points rather than zero will be huge.
definitely
I,
take
I
that.
don't see this being, a huge, electric shootout in terms of touchdowns, just with how talented these defenses are.
Yeah,
But I mean, I guess you don't really know with how Rodgers is going to be. His first time back in the playoffs in a few years. Stroud, obviously very young, but has come alive this year. After early in the year, I think people were kind of doubting him and saying that rookie year was kind of a one-off. He's definitely proven himself and been able to,
Mhm.
when he's been out on the field, kind of show some more consistency. So I'm interested to see how both quarterbacks kind of battle with this pressure that's on the line. And obviously
Yeah,
the Steelers, dating back the last 30 years, have been very successful on Monday Night Football. So glad
that's
and,
good.
and hopeful to keep this streak alive, but it's going to be tough. I think coaching will be huge. Unfortunately, I think I can speak for both of us that we've been pretty dissatisfied with both of the coordinators that we've had this year and the way that they've kind of schemed against some of our opponents. We saw last week against the Ravens, Kenneth Gainwell playing a huge role, Jalen Warren playing a bigger role. Where was that against Cleveland? Especially in the receiving game, they just were not involved in the same way. And you look at that and you think, how was that not involved in last week's game plan? And so I think at times Arthur Smith has just been very inconsistent with utilizing some of our weapons. And if you look at, I don't have the exact stat, but the rate at which we throw over the middle most against most other teams has got to be in the bottom five in the NFL. We just really do not throw over the middle unless it's a do or die situation where we're throwing over the middle and hoping Pat Fryermuth can come up with a catch in double coverage to
Yeah,
help us get three shots to Marquez Valdez-Scantling to end the game. So I think scheming will be huge in this game. That obviously has not been our strength this year, but I do have faith that, Tomlin and Rodgers can come together on this one and hopefully put together a performance where we're at least in the game. The Texans are obviously very dangerous, and I think most people watching this game will be favoring them just with that defense, thinking that they have a defense that can win the Super Bowl. If Stroud can play the way that he did in his rookie year and really come alive, they are dangerous and can easily get to the Super Bowl, if not win it with that defense and with the pressure that they bring. So I think it's going to come down to Aaron's ability to manage the pressure and hang in there. And he's been sacked quite a bit in his career, so he'll definitely be able to manage that and hang in there. But we'll have to see kind of how the offensive line copes and how we chip with the tight ends that we have on the field without Darnell. Pat has not really been known for his blocking in his career, so we'll have to see how we utilize Connor Hayward, regardless if it's just a tush push, but also just on blocking plays where we're throwing the ball, especially if we're trying to create time for DK or Calvin Austin to get downfield. So lot that goes into this game, and we'll be there. So you'll see some clips live from the game in our post game breakdown. But definitely looking forward to it, and glad we get to see some playoff football. And definitely, I think it'll be a good one. I think it'll definitely be a good one. I know that the Steelers are not favored in this game, but we have faith, and they are definitely a team where anything can happen. They might lose to the Browns, but they'll end up beating a team that they don't deserve to beat on paper. So
like
we'll
the
have to see
Colts
how this one goes.
or
Like
the
the
Lions.
Colts, yeah, or the Lions. Yeah, I mean, we
Yeah,
saw how that one came down to at the end. It's a nail biter every week with this team if we're in it. We're not a team that blows out, but we're a team that definitely hangs in there, and we have a talented defense that can help us do that. So hoping that they shine. Need a big game from TJ this week, and we'll see. But looking forward to it, and think it'll be a good one.
definitely. I think also obviously biased, but I'm going to take experience in this one. I'm going to take the experience of Mike T as a head coach and also Aaron in the playoffs. Obviously Stroud, if he's on it, they can be dangerous. They can definitely make a long run, but we'll see. I think to wrap up, I think this is going to be coming out today, Saturday, will be coming out Sunday. But if you have any score predictions or picks for today's games, there's Rams, Panthers in Carolina at I believe 4:30, And then tonight is Packers Bears 8 p.m. So what are your thoughts on those games, real quick?
I think the Rams have a pretty easy, if people were to look at, I know that the Panthers beat them in the regular season, but if people were to look at if you're on the road, where would you prefer to start? It's going to be
Yeah,
tough to beat that Rams team twice this year. I know we were talking about that earlier. It's going to be tough to shut down their weapons twice. Stafford had a rough game in their first meeting. I don't see that happening again. I have to think that the Rams, with how talented they are, with how well coached they are, with how innovative Sean McVay is, will be able to come together and make this happen for them to advance. And then for Bears Packers, I'm honestly surprised that the Packers have been discussed as the favorites as much as they have been this week, because people might say, oh, they won in overtime. No Jordan Love, and Jordan Love will obviously be playing for this game, but that stadium is going to be rocking. I know that they will have a crazy environment there, and will be definitely letting the Packers hear it when they're on the field on offense. And, they'll definitely do their best to help the Bears on offense as well. But I honestly think the Bears will find a way to pull it out. I think Ben Johnson knows what to expect, having these two meetings and having many former meetings against the Packers when he was the OC for the Lions. And I just have to think that the Bears will find a way to pull this out at home. I think that they will be ready for this game. And Ben has, done right by them all year and has surpassed all of their expectations. I think the Bears are an interesting one. I think it goes the same way for the Jaguars and also for the Patriots. If they were to lose first round of the playoffs, sure, it's a disappointment with how many wins that they have, but all three teams have, by far surpassed expectations for this year. So I see the Bears advancing and being able to move on this game. It'll definitely be a good one. Divisional games always are. But I think the Bears will be able to find a way.
yeah. I'm with you. I have the Rams and I have the Bears as well at home. So, it'll be good matchups, definitely fun games to see. And then, as you said, we'll be at the game Monday night. Should be having a breakdown video, hopefully for a win, coming out around probably Tuesday or Wednesday. But, it's all on the line. This is it. We're in the contest. Anything can happen. Here we go, Steelers, baby. Come on.